Are you sick and tired of your players killing what's supposed to be a recurring villain or even your big bad evil guy? Well, I got a solution and a special guest to talk about it. Coming up. Today's a special video. I'm going to be bringing in a friend of mine, a fellow D&D YouTuber, Steve from Lunch Break Heroes. Here he is.
Hey everybody, it's me. So I'm here with DC here today, and we're going to be talking about some narrative outs for your combat when things go sideways. So let's say you are trying to, intimidate your players and maybe embarrass them in the middle of town, and you want to throw your big bad evil guy right at them and have them curb stomp your players.
Early on,
Except it doesn't work out that way. It just doesn't work out that way. They're turning things around and they're winning.
Somehow.
What do you do?
Yeah, right. And I love recurring villains. Like, recurring villains are like a great goal. It ends up being a pipe dream sometimes because then, like you said, the players just kill them somehow, even though there's no way they should have been able to.
It happens. I mean, your players are, they got a lot of ingenuity, and they're always going to come at you sideways, and they're going to surprise you.
Well, and honestly, a lot of times, especially with new players, they have no idea what's going on, so you have a certain expectation for, what you think they're capable of, and then they either collaborate together or have a big breakthrough moment, and then they take out your villain. In this video, we're going to be going over the top 2 ways to prepare beforehand to make sure it doesn't happen the best you could possibly prepare for it, and worst case scenario, clean it up afterwards once they actually inevitably do curb stomp them.
So what do you think? What is kind of your top way when things go sideways? When your players start to beat the crap out of this big, amazing villain that should have been able to trounce them in just a few hits?
The first time this happened to me, it was a Arc Druid, Circle of the Moon, who could shapeshift into an ancient dragon. So I was like, there's no way. And this was a fight following up another fight, so they were for sure screwed, and I wanted to instill some fear in them because they've been a little too successful. And when this fight started to go south, it was the first time it's ever happened, so I was like, and they just killed him. They just straight up killed him. Arc boss, done. They got these items that they shouldn't have got. It was a big mess to clean up, which we'll get into, I guess, later. But there's a ton of stuff now that I wish I knew then to actually put in place and clean up. So some of the things on my list that I've broken up is things to do before the fight, during the fight, and then I guess after the fight. So before the fight, I try and give my villain a display of power to make the players question whether or not they should engage with this thing,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so, they walk into town and they witness maybe this high level spell, or they're just, I don't know, butchering people, depending upon what kind of campaign you're running.
Right. I love the analogy you gave about the town, because maybe an NPC they met beforehand that they had some level of respect for, kneels in front of this guy, and they're like, oh, wait a second, should we? Yeah. Is this guy? Oh, whether it's social, political, or like you said, a spell, that's always a great.
Yeah. Absolutely.
It's always a great tool.
And along those same lines, you don't even need to have necessarily a display of power. Their reputation can precede them. If everybody is, word of mouth is a very powerful thing, both in the game world and in the real world. So, for example, Curse of Strahd, the campaign that I'm currently running and making videos for, my players were deathly afraid of Strahd when they first came in because of word of mouth. They'd never met the guy, but they were terrified of actually meeting him.
Before even actually meeting him, right. And I love the stuff you do in your videos, man, to you have an entire video, I think, on how to roleplay Strahd himself, which I think is huge.
To be fair, he is a tiny segment of that video, but yes.
But you can almost instill that fear without even having him there, so that when he is there, it's just that respect is already, the groundwork has been laid for it already.
It's like this aura of fear that surrounds them just by rumors and stories that the players have heard already.
It is as another layer to that. If the main villain himself isn't enough, I've tried to surround the main villain with henchmen and guards and protectors, and I even had one guy, this mob boss, that was set up in this middle of this tavern that he ran. He had this massive cat panther with it was like a displacer beast with some spines on its back, and I tried to describe it as scarily as possible to make the player scared of it. giving them to almost feel like they'd be outnumbered, or like if you do this, you're screwed because you're in my place. But even that as an example from my campaign, they still pulled the trigger on that fight and fought that fight, and sadly ended up winning that fight too. So,
well, I mean, and when that does happen, that's actually kind of awesome. Yeah. So, I mean, you threw this insurmountable challenge at them, and they rose to the occasion. They were the heroes that the story is about.
Yes, overcame all odds in the middle of this mobster's like lair. So now during fight, and I think this gets to the question you said, like, what would you do? Like, you're in the middle of the fight and like things are going south. You're losing as like your BBEG is losing. What do you do?
Well, all right. So first and foremost, I mean, there's the henchman that we mentioned earlier. So the action economy is a very powerful thing within the game.
Oh my gosh,
so if you have this single lone villain against 4 or 5 heroes, even if they're 5 to 10 levels below that villain, they actually stand a fighting chance. They could hit him 5 times for every 1 time. So balancing out the action economy with those henchmen is vitally important. Now, if you don't want to do that, I mean, you could always add legendary resistances and legendary actions.
Yep. Oh, no, yeah, like legendary actions is I'd say my number 1 go-to, because it's actually him doing it, you know?
Exactly.
Sometimes I'll give a creature 1 legendary action or 2 if it's like a lower tier type guy, you know?
Yeah, but I mean, those were put into the game for exactly this scenario where you needed to balance things out for these lone villains against a whole group of people. It really kind of evens the playing field a little bit.
Matt Colville did a great video on this, and I want to do a whole video of my version of it, but I haven't done it yet because there's just so many videos to make. I'm sure you know.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
But villain actions, that's actually one of my favorite videos from Matt Colville. It's basically a layer action on steroids that happens before the round, and it's just one more tool to help these lone villains be able to stand their ground against the players. But the other things that I would do is some sort of incapacitation abilities as well. Because I don't want to kill my players. That's not my goal. I want to embarrass them or beat them. So some type of incapacitation, or whether it's the villain doing it or his henchman doing it, to try and like restrain them in some way.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, with players being able to call out non-lethal hits at the end of their attacks, villains can do that too. I'm a big proponent of anything the players can do, the enemies can do. And I think it's only fair that they get to do that.
Yeah. And it's almost, I feel like the players would almost get a little scared whenever like, all right, I'm doing a non-lethal attack. They're like, oh my God, they're going to kidnap us. Hold up, you know. Or like they're going to take a kid, they're going to prison.
I mean, they're not trying to kill us. What are they going to do?
It's something even worse.
Of course, you know, they can still succeed, even when you're doing all of these amazing things. And you know, this is where they get to be the heroes that they've really set out to be. And that's all kind of what we want in the end, right? We want them to be these heroes. And sometimes we have to sacrifice these big, great battles that we planned for them in the name of that cause. So, I mean, how do you like to deal with that when that does happen?
Yeah, and if they outwit me, you know, which again, as a new DM, it's gonna happen a lot. So prepare for that, or I guess not prepare for it, just accept it when it happens, kind of like you're saying. So
it's a learning experience.
And so once it actually does happen, you have, you know, ideally it would happen at the end of the session. So then you're like, oh, wow, that was crazy. We'll wrap it up there. Okay. And then they leave and you shut the door behind them and you're like, oh my God, what do I do now? And you can try and like lick your own wounds as a DM to be able to heal your story. But yeah, I feel like it would be a very big blow to the players in a metagaming way, as far as like what they've accomplished, and in an in-game way to sabotage what they did if you were to like undo it in some way. So I let it stand.
Oh yeah,
and
no,
move forward.
I mean, yeah. I mean, you definitely don't want to undo those amazing actions that they've worked so hard for. But that also doesn't mean you have to let it derail the narrative that you want to set out for them.
So
now, I mean, notice I didn't say story, but I said narrative. So the overarching idea, the skeleton of what will become the player's story. So one thing that I like to do is the classic, our princess is in another castle.
Ooh,
Now, yeah, absolutely. What they defeated was, yes, a bad guy, but it wasn't the main villain. No, no, that was just some lowly lieutenant that that was sent out.
Right.
Yeah,
And
totally. That's the ticket.
And so like I have a list of my attempts to save things, because once I realized like, oh crap, like that's an entire arc boss, like that was supposed to be a whole thing. That's actually one of the arc bosses tied into one of my character's backstories that's now gone. So I felt bad for that player's backstory. This shape-shifting arc dragon was my druid's backstory villain that's now dead on the floor. So I had to stop. The players left, and for the first time, I had to try and save my narrative. Which I love the way that you said that, because it's not our story to tell. Like, we put out the pieces, and the players tell the story. So that was one of my first, like, I tasted that for the first time. So I sat there and I thought, and the direction I went with it was, what are the ramifications? You know, like not only like, okay, cool, they did this thing, but what happens now? Like, what maybe worse thing happens now? So then this queen dragon, or this queen arc druid circle of the moon dragon who had been slain, now like her entire following had this elite task force that was now sent after the players to hunt them down.
Ooh,
and
that's rough.
all that came up on the fly, because there was never an elite task force. There was never any of that. There was a certain story at the time in my DMing that I had to tell, but then I had to scrap it and change it. So now they're being hunted. So that was fun.
And would you say that ended up being a better story than the one you had originally conceived?
I love that you asked that, because totally. And across the board, so many times that happens. And as soon as that happened, and then the story was, they're like actively afraid for their lives. And I didn't even mean, like, they beat this dragon, but then now they're being hunted by this task force, and they're like in their sleep. They couldn't sleep anymore. Like, long rest became scary. Like, it elevated the game accidentally. And not because the players told that story, and I just kind of like went with it, and then it went in this awesome direction.
You know what? In the immortal words of one of the best painters to ever sport an afro, there are no mistakes, just happy little accidents.
Yep. And like it's the word retcon comes to mind when, like, that's a retcon, but the players have no idea that was a retcon, and that feels good, because I never had this elite task force of druids that were going to shapeshift, and any animal they looked at from then on was like, is that one of the druids coming out to get us? You know?
Yeah, absolutely.
That was never a thing, but then it became a thing, and it felt like it had always been, but behind the screens, it wasn't that way. So yeah, no, totally.
Yeah, absolutely.
I want to ask you about the Princess in Another Tower, because like that is another extremely good way of handling it. Has there ever been a time where you've had to use Princess in a Tower where something happens and like actually it's this because you want to make sure to set it up?
Yeah, absolutely. Mine, I think, is kind of a more minor example. It's not like my players killed anybody important. But they actually bypassed a very important set piece in their Curse of Strahd campaign. Now, players are supposed to go to a place called Zur Falls to get their fortunes told by this old woman. And when we came to the crossroads and they got a choice to go left or go right and get their fortunes told, they're like, no, we're just going to go left. I'm like, but
it's really cool. You should go that way.
And yeah, being, a facilitator of their story, I couldn't force them to do that. So what I did was I kicked the can down the road, and then when they ended up at another slightly similar camp, a few weeks later, I just had, this old fortune teller's, wagon roll up in the middle of the night, and she's like, I want to see you.
Yes, and but she's always been there. She wasn't before. No. I love it. Yeah.
Well, I mean, she was traveling, but I brought her to them versus the other way around, where it's the way it's supposed to happen.
And like whenever I first was thinking Princess in the Tower, I was thinking from this big, massive scale of it. But that's a great example of a small Princess in the Tower for a story moment that you really wanted to do. That's however big, and then you just like, okay, we're gonna put it over here, but it felt good and it makes sense, and you still let the players do their thing, and facilitate was a great word I think you used there, to like add her in there. That's awesome.
Back to the villain.
Back to the
We've
villain.
taken our detour. We're kicking the can down the road. We're at the other castle now.
And now the old fortune teller, I'm back. So now this villain's dead. He's dead on the floor. So different tropes to try and shake things up. Maybe this guy wasn't the actual villain, and I think you alluded to that a second ago.
Yes.
Is maybe this was the villain's henchman or lackey or posing as the big bad.
His lieutenant is what I said.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So in my main, I can say this now because the campaign's over. In my main campaign, the deceitful one, the dark one, like he had all these names. He was posing as the big bad when really he was following orders from someone far above him. So I already had that set up, and it was great. And he was called the deceitful one, and he's deceiving the players the whole time. But he was viewed as the main guy, but then actually there's somebody else pulling the strings, whatever it is. So you could easily slide in that trope and retcon unknowingly to the players that that's actually the real story.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And you can make that ladder go up as high as you need. There can always be one more rank in the evil league of evil. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Oh, for sure.
It doesn't just have to end at bad horse. Another kind of trope is actually I don't know if I'd call this a trope, but transformation.
Ooh.
I mean, this villain that you had was, he was okay in his human form, but your players dealt with that, and then along comes maybe Mr. Necromancer to raise that body up, and now your players are going to have to deal with undead Mr. Villain, and that's a whole different ballgame.
Oh yeah.
So he can come back again. I mean, this is kind of like Super Shredder, if you will. If you're a child of the 80s and 90s.
Repeat.
But hopefully a much better story with higher production value.
Oh, for sure. Liches in general are always the first thing that comes to mind whenever you have like a recurring villain that has like a revival death component, whether it's a lich that revived the villain or the villain that you just slain was a lich himself and now is phylactery, and then they have to find that out. My biggest thing that I usually tend to do if I am going to employ that, or any advice I've given to other people that did, is to try and make sure that there was some sort of foreshadowing to that fact, and it doesn't look like you're like, oh well, I like that bad guy, I'm gonna revive him.
Yes. Yeah, and Deus Ex Machina is what you're really trying to avoid there.
Yeah.
Foreshadowing is key, and not just in a game, in any story, really. Mm-hmm. Now, for those of the viewers who are not familiar, Deus Ex Machina comes from the old Greek plays, where they were, I guess, such terrible writers that they wrote themselves into corners all the time. And at the end of the play, they had to literally have a god, just an actor, of course, they literally had to have a god come down on pulleys, wave their hand to create some magic, and fix the whole situation. They were literally the god of the machine.
Yeah.
And it's very cheap storytelling, and you can see it from a mile away nowadays.
Oh yeah.
And foreshadowing is the key to getting rid of the disappointment from Deus Ex Machina. You can still use it, but you have to make it part of your world. You have to let it live within the rules of your story.
Alluding to it, or having mechanics, and kind of going back to what you said in the beginning, is having that reputation of this lich, or this reputation of certain signs that have been shady or what's happening. There's this weird magic that we're detecting. There's these weird crystals we're finding. There's this aura of the animals are acting weird, or like something going on. Whether it's directly tied to that or not, that you can be able to pin it on. And I think in the story that we talked about one-on-one is you walk into the town and you're talking to this villain, and there's like this suspicious old hooded figure in the corner that the players interact with, but it's a fleeting moment and they just leave him alone, and then out of nowhere this guy comes back. Or like these little moments that you leave as little breadcrumbs that could potentially go back to and like fall back on.
Those are the aha moments when they think back on all the events that led up to where they're at now.
Right. And they should have seen it coming. Like they should feel like, oh my God, I should have seen that. Oh my God, of course.
Yeah, absolutely.
because one of my back to that campaign of the big bad that was pulling the strings, he had a little bit of a lich vibe going to him, and he could like go and take his essence and put it into others and take it out, and the players had to try and figure out a way to destroy him when he was this really amorphous entity that could go in and out of people, possess and leave and fly. Like, it was a really difficult thing for that, but they knew that. They knew that they had to be
there's
creative.
a Denzel Washington movie with that same plot. I love it.
But they knew that going into it, so it didn't feel bad that I just like, oh, they're about to kill him, and then whoa, he flies away. Haha. Like, they knew that they were getting into that, and whenever they failed at catching him or failed at trapping him in that body to be able to slay him before he got away, they knew that like, that's our bad. We should have done this. Ooh, I didn't see this coming. We could have prepared more. You know, instead of like, I go, he fight another day, and then he flies away. You know, so foreshadowing for sure.
Absolutely. Huge. Yeah. So I mean, you've got a lot of different options to deal with this villain that you want to throw early on at your players before the battle happens, during the battle, and even after. Ooh. So there's various ways that you can handle all of this.
So you saying that reminds me of the after part, how you can try to preserve this villain of ours, right? Like, you want him to live, and we talked about he's super strong, he's going too much. What could you do to knock out your players? But then if the players start winning and he's looking bad, have an escape plan. That's the biggest. The other point I missed out earlier is have an escape plan for this guy to get the heck out of there that doesn't feel too cheap. And
that's where your Deus Ex Machina comes in. When he's getting trounced by your players, I mean, sure, you could have, a big god like Vecna pop in and grab him by the scruff of his neck and throw him through a portal, but that feels cheap.
Yeah.
Whereas if you had foreshadowed it with that mysterious hooded figure, and he comes in and does the exact same thing, it's not cheap. It's within the rules and the boundaries that you've already set up, and you've left those breadcrumbs that lead up to the current escape plan.
Oh, yes. And the players would have this moment like, oh my God, I talked to that old guy. If I had done this, maybe, I could have seen it coming if I had interacted with that old man differently.
If we had just slaughtered everybody in this village before we got to the villain, then we'd be the villains.
Murder hobos. Oh, no. We can do another video on murder hobos.
Absolutely.
So yeah, I mean, I think it's something so simple as this old man, or for the mob boss guy, my thing for him was there were stagecoaches in the back. They were like pointing out, and there was guards standing around them. So like, that was his escape plan. He never got there. He died before they could get there. But having some sort of like setup, or some sort of, maybe the rumors, like you're saying, this respected figure, he can teleport, and that's like a thing, that's like a known thing. So maybe your casters prepare counterspell or something, and they can feel prepared, and if they fail, then it doesn't feel so bad and leave a bad taste in their mouth.
Yes, absolutely. And all this is going to help drive them along the narrative arc that you've created for them. And hopefully they'll come out the other end with a great story and a great villain. Whether or not that's the one that you started out with is completely up in the air. Yeah, but
right,
like you said in your example there, you might come out the other end of this with a completely different story, completely different villain, but a much better experience for it.
Right. And I think the biggest thing is that you don't want to rob the players of the story they are telling to be able to force your story on them, Yes,
which is a great segue into the video that's going to be over on my channel, where we talk about DM mistakes, very common ones. And one of those is confusing the story that you want to tell with the story that your players are currently experiencing. So definitely stay tuned for that. So DC, I want to thank you for having me on your show here. I think we've had a great conversation, and hopefully I'll see all of you over on my channel.
Time out. It worked. I just wanted to stop and say that this is one awesome guy, and y'all really should go check him out. He agreed to do this collaboration with me when I had less than 300 subscribers. You can tell how genuine he is in his videos, and he has some great content. And in my opinion, he is the #1 resource when it comes to running any kind of module in D&D. In fact, the reason I wanted to do a collaboration with him was for that reason. I am a pure homebrew DM, and he's a pure module DM. So when I found him, I wanted to give you guys the best resource possible for any of your pre-made adventure needs. So go share that Dungeon Crew love over to those lunch break heroes. And once again, thank you, Steve, for doing this collaboration with me. I know I had a blast making this video with him, and if y'all did too, let me know. Hit that like button and leave a comment if you want to see more of these collaboration videos. Links to his channel will be right here at the end screen and down in the description. And if you can't tell, I'm in my new film room. And none of this would be possible, especially this soon, if it wasn't for all the support over on Patreon. There are so many of y'all now. I appreciate it so much, and everything goes right back into the channel to give you guys better and better content each week. So again, thank you. I hope you're now prepared to set your villain up for success or clean up in the aftermath and still tell an amazing story. So until next time, stay creative and think outside that box. Peace.